Brilliant. Thank you all for coming. This is probably the real kind of like heart of the whole issue in today's talk, which is how you pay for it. Because obviously all the schools here today are independent schools charging fees. And I've got a really interesting panel to address this question. Richard Morris from Killik, Camilla Smiley from the Good Schools Guide, and Henry Vaughan from Selina Finance. And they're going to give you very different angles on the question of how you pay for it. So I'm going to start off, we've kind of sequenced it roughly that Rich is going to talk initially about what Killik and Company do and the kind of financial planning that parents make, all parents have to make about how to pay the fees. And then Camilla's going to talk about how you might pay less fees. So that means kind of bursaries, effectively. And then Henry is going to talk about a very specific way that parents handle some of the pressures that come with senior school fees and the kind of what you might call peak fee, which is, you know, if you've got more than one child particularly, you suddenly become aware that your outgoings go through the roof when they're teenagers. So just to kick us off then, I'm going to ask Richard to talk a little bit about Killik & Co. And what it is that they do and whether they work with many parents who pay school fees.
Thank you. Yeah. Hello, everyone. So Killik & Co. is an independently owned wealth manager, and we've been advising private clients and families for over 35 years on how to save, plan and invest. And what we found over the last few years, and the last year in particular, is that the school fees conversation is front and centre for lots of our clients. In fact, it really is probably one of the big 2 or 3 objectives our clients have. The other ones being retirement and probably property questions, but school fees is absolutely front and centre at the moment. And I would have thought most of our clients are asking us about that, and it's probably pushing into different parts of our client base in a way it didn't previously do so. So it's definitely moving into our older client base who are preparing for or thinking about contributing to school fees. And we do have some even younger clients who are almost pre-children starting to think about ring fencing a pot for the future cost of education.
Okay, so that set up the framework. Could you briefly summarise the kind of questions that people come into your office to ask about?
Sure. So Killik is based in Mayfair. That's our head office. And we have 6 satellite offices around London that serve to work with the local community. The office that I run is down on Northcote Road. So being on the curb and being on the pavement, I get people popping in to ask a question all the time. And we are really set up to take that off the curb question. So I get everything, absolutely. From my children are starting in September, can you help? Can I crack my pension to pay for school fees? Do you have a specific product to help parents pay for school fees? I've got older clients and older prospective clients asking about inheritance. So I really get the full suite of questions. And the honest answer is the vast majority of questions I get are fairly sensible, with individuals sort of knowing what they want to achieve. They just want some help doing it.
And so broadly, is it that people are looking to kind of take the sting out of the annual payment? Is that you know, is it this, oh my goodness, I've got to pay 25,000 a year or whatever it is, or?
It's a bit of both. I think a lot of people are planning to do it is on an ongoing basis, pay termly, using income, using gifts from family. So it's not just those thinking, how do I sort a lump sum out? It's those looking for that ongoing advice and ongoing help to meet the cost of, truthfully, 2 decades worth of fees. Mm-hmm. And as you said earlier, if you've got multiple children, you've got to think about that as second and third mortgages even. So how we work with our clients on an ongoing basis, we hope is the magic.
So are there ways that you can make paying school fees more tax efficient if you're a parent or grandparent?
We hope so, yes. So tax efficiency is the core of everything we do around the advice and the investment solutions we have for clients. And there's no one magic answer here. It tends to be a blend of different approaches. Using ISAs, for example, is a very tax-efficient pot for both parents and even grandparents to pull from. That's a pot you can access very quickly, very tax-efficiently. We can talk about establishing trusts. Bare trusts are quite tax-efficient for grandparents to open for grandchildren. It's not so efficient for parents to open that mechanism, but for grandparents to do so is quite tax efficient. And the third one, sometimes overlooked, are gifts from regular income. So if you've got, again, grandparents, I'm talking about them a lot, but that is what we're doing at the moment. But for grandparents paying for school fees out of regular income, pension income would count. That's a very tax efficient mechanism to reduce the size of the estate. It's instantly out of the estate for inheritance tax. And what we find is families, we have a multi-generational approach to our conversations, and 2 or 3 different solutions in combination tend to work best.
So I've done versions of this talk over the years. One of the things I find most interesting with that one is the how you bring up the topic with your parents. Oh, would you like to help with the school fees? Do you have any advice for anybody else?
It's not an easy conversation for families, and short of getting everyone in the same room, there's no one way I've found that works best. So again, the offices we have around London are being increasingly set up as a no suits, no jargon environment to come in and have a conversation, essentially around a big kitchen table. So we would get grandparents and parents together in the same room. We act as an advisor. We try to bridge the gaps and work with both generations, but it's not an easy topic at all.
I mean, that's an interesting service to be able to offer, isn't it? It's almost like a form of family therapy.
It can be, and as I say, we've got a site in Northcote, a site in Chiswick, and a site in Esher that's set up like this. And our thinking was that a lot of family-based financial conversations happen around the kitchen table. So we've really built these environments that are, we hope, not intimidating. You can walk in, have a conversation, have a cup of tea around a kitchen table style environment with an advisor to help as a family work through the issues.
And, culturally, Britain is, talking about money is quite difficult within families often.
Very much so. Yes, we are. I think the Americans are very, very kind of open about it. They talk about these issues freely. I don't think we're as good over here.
Many parents here are probably already paying school fees. Who is currently paying school fees? Yeah, many parents here are currently paying school fees. Perhaps you may, if you're lucky, be halfway through the journey, perhaps even more. Is it too late to do any financial planning?
Absolutely not. So financial planning is a multi-decade or longer process for all of our clients. And our job is to make every element of their finances as streamlined as possible. Now, if an element for a sustained period of time is school fees, we can focus on that. But you will have other financial requirements down the line: retirement, drawing from pensions, property, moving, selling, all of that. And our job is to help with all of the elements to your finances. And the reality is, from nursery to university, during that timescale, you're going to encounter other financial elements to your circumstances. Change in income, change in expenditure, change in property, potentially retirement, all of these elements. And so financial planning can add to and help those parts of your life. So it truly is never too late. It's very rare we see a client able to deal with a 20-year school fee burden ahead of time. So absolutely, it is the norm for most of our clients to be adding in financial planning halfway, 3/4 of the way down the track.
What contingencies should you be planning for? I mean, obviously, there's a cost of living crisis going on, all sorts of reshaping of the economy happening. Should you be planning for? Can you plan for loss of income with school fees? And what about? Should you be having any kind of insurance against that? And how does it also relate to life insurance?
Yes, you can, and our clients do. It is a bit trickier, but loss of income is the big one. Critical illness, divorce, sadly, is another one to sort of navigate around. But the provision tends to be, as you say, insurance-style solutions. So you've probably got some form of income protection through work, but we would always recommend having a private setup as well. And then you can think about specific policies that might sit in the background should you need them. So probably a life insurance for the surviving spouse or even guardian to look after children. And then there are more specific policies, like a family income benefit, which is almost a tailor-made style of insurance that will trigger at the date of death and then will pay out for a given period of time, in this case to cover the end of school fees. So there are policies in place, and that's where our financial advisors or wealth planners will kick in and advise our clients on the best policies.
Okay, thank you, Richard. I mean, he's got the hardest gig, I think. He's explaining something that's highly customised and personal, and obviously everyone's situations differ. So you can go and talk to him individually to discuss your particular situations. We're going to turn now to a slightly different approach to the same topic from Camilla. We're going to talk about ways you might actually pay less to start off with. Well, let's start with what the costs are. How much are senior school fees for London day schools and boarding these days, Camilla?
Yeah, so up and up is the headline, as we all know. Currently, or in 2023, interestingly, boarding schools in the southeast, you're looking at around £15,000 a term, so about £45,000 a year, touching 50 in some of the bigger names, including those here today. That's for a full boarding experience, so that's Sunday night to Saturday afternoon, or even only coming home for exeats every 2 or 3 weeks. Day schools, London and the southeast is hugely inflated, as you can imagine. So day schools in London now, you're looking at about £25,000 to £30,000 a year. The very big names, the big old institutions like Westminster, for example, are at the top of that bracket, and your smaller local day school with a slightly smaller geographical catchment and a smaller name will be less. But around 25 to 30 for day schools in London. If you read the independent school census data and the press, then you'll see that actually nationally, the average day school fee is sort of 6,000 or 7,000. But don't apply that to London and the southeast, because it's different round here.
It is. I was at Bromsgrove School last week, and if you commute from Birmingham or Solihull to your job in London, I mean, the day fees are spectacularly lower.
Exactly. And the extras as well, there's a huge difference. So if you're outside London in, say, a school in Surrey or Berkshire, then the school fees for the bus are much more than you'll get outside the southeast. So if you've got 3 children getting the bus to school every day in Surrey, then you might be looking at £2,000-3,000 a year on your school bus fees. Outside of the southeast, that's different. Music lessons, again, I mean, some of I was at a prep school recently where a 30-minute music lesson is now £45, which if your 8-year-old is doing, a couple of instruments, casually turning up now and then, not doing any practice in between, suddenly that's £90 a week that you're spending on their lessons. So it all tots up those extras. So take those headlines with a pinch of salt and think about those extras.
And so just before we get on to the topic of bursaries, one way that you can save some money is by thinking about, a lot of the schools here, for example, our boarding schools will also have day places at considerably lower price than London schools. And if you want to look at ways to save some money, you can look at moving outside London. That's quite an efficient thing to do, isn't it? You
can. A day place at a boarding school is more than a day place at a day school on the whole.
Not at Bromsgrove.
And you're looking at if you're a day student at somewhere like Wellington, for example, then you're there from first thing in the morning until last thing at night. The only thing you're not getting from that school experience is a bed. And so you're getting access to all of those facilities and the expertise and basically most of what the boarders are getting. So do expect to pay a premium to be a day pupil at those big boarding schools.
Okay, so let's move on to the kind of bursary scholarships thing. Before we get into bursaries, which is I think what we're really talking about, I mean, there is some confusion about bursaries and scholarships. Do you want to explain what the difference is between the two? And
yeah, so on the whole, a bursary is means-tested financial support and a way for a school to allow anybody to come there regardless of their income, of their financial position. So a bursary is just that financial support. A scholarship, on the whole, is an award, a recognition of of a particular strength, maybe it's academic, music, drama, dance, sport, etc. And a scholarship nowadays generally carries either very little fee remission or none at all. And it's more about the prestige of being a scholar. Scholars in schools tend to be able to access, for example, extension programs or elite coaching if you're on a sports scholarship, free music lessons if you're on a music scholarship. But generally now, schools have phased out fee remission for scholars and are putting that instead into the bursary provision that they can offer for those children who are good enough to pass the exams and absolutely deserve a place at their school on merit, but whose parents wouldn't otherwise be able to afford the fees.
Yeah, with some notable exceptions. So for example, if you've got an incredibly musical child, you might want to look at Wells Cathedral School. Or,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And some schools do still package the two together so that you can access bursary support, but only if you're a scholar. So you get a scholarship, and then they'll start talking to you about bursarial fee assistance. But for most schools now, they're moving towards separating the two.
Okay, so a lot is spoken about with bursary provision. We haven't got any schools in the room, I think, so let's get real. How much is available, and up to what income levels?
Yeah, so there is more and more available every year, and schools have done a huge amount in the past 5 or 10 years in terms of putting aside money for their bursary support, fundraising with current parents, with alumni. Some schools have endowments, most schools don't. And so they're funding those bursaries from current fee income and from the fundraising that they're asking probably you to engage with. The reality is that most of the schools that I've spoken to recently have been looking more at transformational bursaries. So that is bursaries usually of 75% of the fees and upwards, up to 110% of the fees in some cases, which then cover things like uniform, transport to and from school, those music lessons that I was talking about. So the transformational bursaries is where a lot of schools have done tremendous work in the last few years. The conversation now, though, I'm finding, is that with VAT, we haven't mentioned VAT yet.
No.
With VAT, and with fee increases of 6, 7, 8% a year anyway, that more and more parents are finding themselves unable to afford the fees, but not qualifying for those transformational bursaries. And so actually, some schools I've spoken to recently have been talking about how in the next few years, they're likely to look back at that middle market to ensure genuine breadth within the student body. So you don't have schools where you have a few people who can afford the fees and a few people who can't afford any of the fees and nobody in between. So I'm expecting there to be a little bit more support in the 40%, 50%, 60% bursary market over the next few years as VAT potentially hits parents. But I mean, the answer is, Guy, there is more and more every year. But equally, fees are going up and up. So there's more parents asking for that support.
Just to give some context on this, I happened to be turning out my mother's house recently, and I found my sister's school fees from 1983. And she was at a convent school in Worcester, very academic, Catholic-run girls' convent school. Admittedly, half the teaching was done by unpaid nuns, which probably explains the level of fee. But the fee for a term was £300. And even you put that into a fee calculator, inflation calculator, it works out at about £2,000 a term. And that was not an unusual level of fee back in 1983. School fees have gone up enormously, absolutely enormously. And this is why it's an issue, isn't it? It's So I suppose, we know that schools have money available. Do we know what income levels count as being,
Yeah, so some schools, schools are getting more transparent about this. For a long time, schools were very unwilling to commit to an income level publicly because I suppose that makes the decision-making process for them much harder when they've got lots of applications. In London, if your family, your household income is around 90,000, then you're probably right at the upper threshold for bursary support at the moment. That's how it's looking now. Bear in mind that being at the upper threshold means that they may be able to offer you a 5 or 10% bursary. It's not that at 90,000 they'll be able to give you a full bursary. So it's about there for most schools. Some of the wealthier schools will look at household incomes of up to 110, 120,000. But basically, for your London day schools, 90 seems to be about where it is at the moment.
So it's, I mean, it really isn't something that is available for a lot of middle-class families, is it, to be realistic? Supposing you do fall into the right territory and you decide that you want to start applying, how should you talk to schools about it?
Again, this is something that schools have invested a lot of energy and time into over the past few years. And in my experience, registrars and bursars are extremely welcoming people. And so as a starting point, I wouldn't be worried about talking to schools about it and being very upfront about the position that you're in. They will treat that with respect and with confidentiality, and they will tell you about how they might be able to help. As a rule of thumb, at the point where you register your child to sit the admissions test for that school, and we're talking mainly about 11 plus upwards, by the way, there's much less bursary support available at prep level. So we're thinking about year 7 and onwards. At the point where you're registering your child for those tests to go into year 7, there's probably a box you'll need to tick on the registration form to say, if my child is offered a place, then we are likely to need some sort of fee assistance. And that sets a process in motion which runs simultaneously to your child's entrance exams, during which the school will interrogate very thoroughly your financial position. And they'll then get to the point where they'll be able to hopefully make your child an academic offer of a place at the school, but also an offer of bursary support to go alongside that. So I would say be really open with schools, ask them about how they handle that process. Try to get a feel for the culture as well of that school and what their approach is to bursaries. How, I don't know, some of these schools are doing, Latimer Upper, for example, it's doing amazing work and is now genuinely a very diverse community with a broad range of incomes represented within those students. There are still some schools around where it might be harder culturally to be the child there who's on a bursary. Not that anybody will know, that information is absolutely confidential and there's no reason for you or your child to share that with anyone or with their classmates. But I would try to dig a little bit about what it might feel like to be there on fee assistance and how that school community works.
Read Boris Johnson's memoirs. He famously disliked being a scholarship boy at Eton in the days when scholarship meant money off the fees. So, I mean, there can be issues, but I mean, a lot of schools are trying hard to ameliorate them, aren't they? In terms of an event like this, is actually quite good for that shopping around process, isn't it? So, how would you use the show here today?
Yeah, I was saying to a parent this morning, actually, I think the anonymity with the schools here is really nice. You can just wander up. There's no need to have engaged formally by email. They don't know who you are or where you're coming from. They're going to speak to lots of people today. So actually, it's a really nice forum, I think, this to have those conversations quite openly. So speak to them about what they can offer, about when that process should start, when the conversation should begin. Something which I think everybody needs to consider in this is, at what stage do you involve your child in those conversations? Ideally, you would be thinking about this with the schools before your child goes anywhere near an open day, for example, because what you don't want to be is in a position where your child has fallen in love with the 50-metre swimming pool, and it turns out that there's no way you're going to be able to afford the fees, and the school is not going to be able to help you with that. So if I was you, I would be using this today where, your children are all presumably off at school somewhere now, so you can have those conversations quite openly with registrars today and talk about how the time frame would work from their point of view.
Okay, so so far we've had two quite tricky sets of conversations being proposed. One is sitting around a kitchen table with your parents, talking to them about how they might help with the school fees, or alternately talking on your own about your own finances and your financial planning. The other is to go and talk to schools about your finances and then get them to investigate. So, Henry, do you have anything less complex to tell us?
I mean, yeah, we look. It's a topic that a lot of our clients are coming to talk to us about at the moment. Sort of reiterating what's already been said. I think a lot of people are really struggling to pay the fees, and I think a lot of people, particularly when they have the bursaries conversation, are struggling with the fact that the property they bought 10 or 15 years ago is now worth supposedly so much on paper that they no longer qualify for a bursary. And so my company helps people use the liquidity that they've got tied up in their home to be able to smooth out the cost of paying school fees. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's a very serious financial commitment, particularly if you've got multiple children at school at the same time. It can get really challenging in terms of cash flow management. Our product allows a little bit of flexibility with that and helps parents smooth things out.
Could you briefly summarise how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's called a home equity line of credit. We're the first financial provider in this country to offer it. It's very, very popular in the US and Canada and Australia, other big home-owning nations. And it essentially acts as a very large overdraft that sits on top of your existing mortgage and allows you to draw down in installments, in any number of installments, the money that you need to pay for school fees, or for anything else for that matter. We have a number of people who do it for school fees and home improvements, or school fees and debt consolidation, any number of different use cases. The reason that a lot of people really like it, and a lot of people came to us telling us it was great for school fees, it's sort of the reason that we're here, is because schools, typically, you have to pay on a termly or an annualized basis. And with a traditional mortgage or a traditional type of loan, you'd have to draw down the full amount on day one to pay for your 5 years of your children's education. One of the extraordinary things about financial services in this country is that you've basically got the option of a personal loan that you can get from a supermarket up to a 10-year fixed mortgage. And there's very, very little that fits the gap in between. And that's what we're trying to address. Giving parents the flexibility to be able to only pay interest on the amount they need when they actually need it. And if they don't need it, they won't pay any interest on it. Yeah,
and if you did it, if you tried to guess what the school fees would be in 5 years' time by doing it up front, that would be pretty, I mean, that's kind of hedging in a big way.
You'd have a better crystal ball than I do, certainly. Yeah.
So what kinds of parents and families use your product?
I mean, all sorts. We've got customers who have, from very, very strong financial backgrounds with incredibly large household incomes, who use us as a cash management tool, essentially. They know that they've got multiple children at school at the same time. It's a big cash flow burden. And we've got people who have very, very strong incomes who come to us looking to smooth out the cost of that because they want to protect their ISA, or they want to protect investments that they've got so that they can liquidate those investments on their own terms. We also have people who are earlier in their journey with younger children who have ambitions to, attend that school with a 50-metre pool that they really want to do, and it's slightly out of budget. Our product allows them to spread the cost of that education beyond the time that their child is 18, take on the fact that they know they're going to be paying it off whilst perhaps their child is still at university or even perhaps beyond, but they take that trade-off and it's a commitment they want to make to further their child's education.
I think obviously you're doing something with your home here, so it's quite a significant kind of asset to be throwing into the mix. I kind of see that everyone, if they are eligible, might be suited to a bursary. Everyone probably needs financial planning. Are there people who shouldn't be thinking about your product?
Absolutely. Financial products are very, very complex things, and you've got to make sure that this is the right product for you. And the key, I think, for us is that you speak to one of our financial advisors, which is always free, and they can assess your current financial situation and figure out if the product's for you. For many people, borrowing a little bit more on their existing mortgage may be a much better financial solution. They may have an option with grandparents. They may have an option for bursaries. It really isn't for everyone. We're here to help those people that Camilla mentioned earlier, that slightly trapped in the middle, where their assets or their income are a little bit too high. They don't quite meet the bursary threshold. They don't have grandparents available. It's another string to their bow. It's another option available to people. Yeah,
and so. I mean, I guess in a way you've kind of answered this question, but is smoothing out the costs of fees the main reason people use?
I think typically, yes. I think there is also an element of, particularly at the moment, we have a lot of people talking to us about their concerns about VAT. They don't know what the fees are going to cost. The joy of our facility is that you can set up a facility for a certain amount and you won't pay any interest on it if you don't use it. So we have parents who are building quite a lot of fudge factor into their financial planning for school fees, but also for things like devices and stuff that you mentioned earlier. They don't know what musical instruments their child's going to take. They don't know how much the school bus is going to cost. They want a little bit of fudge factor built into their school fee planning to know that if they need that additional cost, if the VAT that's passed on to schools is more than they perhaps expected it to be, because schools are going to be insulating parents from perhaps some of it. They want to know that they've got that budget in place, they've got that facility in place so that they can draw it down if they need to use it, and if they don't need to use it, they won't pay for it.
Great, thank you. And I mean, I also thank you all for coming in to hear this talk. I think these are quite difficult topics to think about. So we've got a really interesting panel and a really interesting set of different things you might slot into, and you might slot into all three in a way. I could see how I might simultaneously make use of all of your services. So does anybody have any questions? Wait, just hold on that, we can bring the mic, otherwise we can't hear.
I know your last panelist addressed VAT, but can you, the rest of you, tell us how likely you think it is to come into play? And will it be the full 20%? So I'm in a position where my daughter is in a prep school at year 5, but there is no way we could afford another 20% to send her to the senior school. So it's that situation. Do we carry on into the senior school or do we move her into state? And a lot of parents in her year group, in her prep school, are now thinking about state because of the expected VAT.
So before the panel answer, we ran a forum on this with Ms. Gundareya a few months ago, and we had the person who's written the policy for Labour speaking, and various other experts and legal experts about the likelihood of challenge. The conclusion was if Labour get it, which is pretty likely, it's a dead cert. So it's going to happen. But what that means in terms of, we had 75 schools and school groups in the room. What that means in terms of what they'll pass on varies enormously. So but for a start, I'm sorry, I'm just going to quickly summarise this one. But schools can claim back certain things. So they don't, although the VAT's charged at a certain rate, you can also claim back VAT, which they can't currently do, and particularly building work. So some schools can claim back quite a lot, actually. So they're all modelling it, and I've spoken to now probably about 80 schools on this. You need to talk to each one individually, because like everything to do with independent schools, there is no one-size-fits-all answer. But you should expect there to be some sort of increase. But it could be anything from like 3 or 4% to 17 or 18%.
Guy, can I jump in on that as well? I think that's it's really important, and as you said about sort of future affordability and the fudge factor, these school fees are going up and up regardless of the VAT or not. And over the past, I read one model recently which suggested that when Labour win an election and when they introduce VAT on school fees, then school fees will have risen by about a third in the past 5 years. I mean, that's huge, and only 20% of that is anything to do with VAT. I think you need to feel like when you go into this process, you believe at that time that you can afford fee increases, Labour or no Labour. and schools do have hardship funds that they can give if you come into financial difficulty that wasn't foreseen, that you couldn't anticipate, then they can help with emergency hardship funding. But my advice to all parents at the moment is really to fully believe that you can afford this for your family. And I think the VAT conversation has been quite helpful in highlighting that. But actually, fees have been going up 7 or 8% every year now for the last few years. So even if Labour don't win the election, even if they don't introduce this extra tax on schools, then you've got to be able to afford those fee increases anyway.
Can I add as well? I think on top of that, be very, very cautious of these pay in advance schemes as well. They're not fully worked out, then the legislation can move around. HMRC might have something to say about them, so I'd be extremely cautious with those pay in advance schemes as well.
Any more questions? Oh, it's got a bit glum.
Sorry.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, we're waiting for the mic. Could you just explain a little bit more about the pay in advance? Because obviously our school is offering it.
Yep.
So why do we need to be so cautious?
So I think there was a very interesting article written the other day, and I can share it with you afterwards and point you towards it, about the time of supply issue. So if you were to pay now, for example, you're locking in at the 2024 VAT rules. But if your school is there to sit with your money, and it's deemed to be that the time of supply for the education is in the future, if Labour's to move the legislation around, it might be that you don't lock in today's VAT rules for the future. I'd also you should look at the financial stability of the organisation of the school as well. And I would hesitate putting too much money in advance into a school whose financial situation isn't very, very robust. And I think finally HMRC, as I said, might want to look at the legitimacy of these pay in advance schemes from how they're viewing the tax position. So I don't think paying a number of years in advance is worth it. Smaller, potentially, but many years into the future, I'd be very cautious of.
For interest, the Bursars Association have modelled the likely effects of this, and they predict about 10% of schools will go bust. That's unlikely to be the kind of schools they think are vulnerable, are not the kind of schools that are here today. On the whole, it's small religious schools, it's small prep boarding schools, single-sex schools in country areas, things like that. London schools are very strong. They have I was talking to the three heads that I spoke with in the first talk about whether it was having any effect on demand for them, and it isn't. The demand in London is very, very healthy. So you can be pretty sure that these schools are secure. But there is a thing also about tax evasion. That one of the things that Ms. Kunderea was saying is that if schools are recently introducing a pay in advance scheme, that will be seen as tax evasion by HMRC.
More cheer.
Yep.
Just to try and lighten the mood a little bit. Going back to what you were saying, the short-term projection is pretty bleak, clearly, as we're discussing. As a slightly more long-term projection, given that the whole big picture with one kid is essentially about 16 years of education, what do any of you have any sense of what the longer-term effects of these short-term negatives might be? I.e., is there a positive backswing to this potentially? If this demand does diminish at those schools and and therefore those year-on-year increases have to come down because people can't afford it, am I sort of being overly positive here, or is that potentially?
What do you reckon, man?
Oh, well, I had actually wanted to do exactly the same, so I wish someone else had answered. I mean, I've thought exactly the same. It's about, from the fee increases point of view, one of the conversations that actually I was having with some colleagues recently is, why have these fees gone up so steeply? And as you say, one theory is that the market will pay it and therefore there's been nothing to control those fee increases. And you're right, therefore, if the market can't pay it, then surely that has a dampening effect. But there are other pressures on schools, like the fact the teacher pension scheme is becoming much more expensive, the fact that it becomes much more expensive to heat that swimming pool, the fact, the all of those pressures that every industry is facing are being faced by independent schools too. So unfortunately, I don't think it's as simple as a drop in demand would lead to a fee correction. And as you say, if demand is as high and as healthy as ever at these sorts of schools that we might be talking about, then...
Yeah, I mean, there's certain things, I think there's a lot of bleating that goes on in this sector. So state schools have to pay teacher pensions, same rate, no different. And they manage to deliver education at about a third of the cost of independent schools, often in quite nice buildings that they've built, they've had rebuilt in the last 30 years, often in better buildings. And then similarly, private equity-backed firms are making 20% profit margins, often on lower fees than some of these schools. Some schools are basically quite inefficient. And yeah, there's going to be a bit of a correction of the market, I think, and schools will have to learn. It's called the art teacher, the art teacher who won't wash up the brushes costs. So I was having lunch with the chairman of the Births Association, who was telling me he looked at one school where they employed a member of staff and paid £20,000 a year to come in and wash the brushes because the kids and the art teacher wouldn't wash up the paint pots. So yeah, there's some of that needs to be stripped out, I think, and would be quite a good thing.
I think what's perhaps important to note as well is that we might see a calming down in what's been nicknamed the facilities arms race.
Yep.
So a lot of schools have been building facilities because parents have demanded it, and in order to compete for those parents, they've had to be seen to be investing in their facilities. I think as that investment slows down a little, we probably won't see a fee correction, but much like the current inflation data, we may see a calming down in the rate that the fees are increasing to allow the rest of the cost of living and to allow wages to catch up a little. So in relative terms, they may come down a little.
One last question.
So on this 20% VAT, I'm curious to understand the timescale of implementation. Is this something that is likely, I mean, legislation takes a while to pass.
No, it doesn't need legislation, so it's going to be really quick.
It's going to be very quick.
Yeah.
Right.
I think September 25
or even sooner.
is what we're...
It could even be sooner.
But could they do it midway through an academic year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my question.
Yeah, it could be.
Why?
New tax year.
I'll look into it because I thought there would be some sort of, legislation. There's a big backlog of legislation in the UK at the moment.
It doesn't need legislation.
Right, they can.
No, we went around this in great detail in the forum, and it could be very, very fast.
Okay, thank you.
To be bleak, sorry. Right, that was really, really interesting. I know that this is a hard topic for people to ask questions because it's so personal and you don't want to share it to a group. All of our speakers are now on their stands. Henry and Richard are literally just over the road here, and Camilla is round the corner with the Good Schools guide. So do go and talk to them individually. And thank you all very much.